Welcome to the Good Music Podcast, a show where we discuss artists, songs, and talk about why we love them. New episodes every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Central. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and become a patron to gain access to exclusive content. And now, on with the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Good Music Podcast. I'm Lucas.
I'm Grant.
And I'm Ethan, and if it is your first time listening to us, we would like to welcome you. Here's what you need to know. At the end of this episode, if you like what you hear, subscribe to the podcast. We're growing in subscribers every single week, and you can be one of those people that's helping us grow. Also, if you've been around for a while, follow us on Instagram or Facebook. That's where you can get in touch with us. That's where if you have any ideas for any good music that we should be covering on this podcast, you can DM us or you can comment or get in touch with us there. And if you are a hardcore good music fan, then follow us and subscribe to us and donate to us on Patreon. That's where you get special access to early episodes and our awesome, amazing, always evolving after hours segment, which is I think next week we're going to be launching into we haven't decided a name. I'm wanting to call it the Bad Music Podcast, but we're going to be talking about whatever artist it is that week. We're going to be talking about their worst songs. And it is so fun, and it's hilarious.
It is fun.
And so if you like good music, there's a high likelihood that you will also laugh at bad music like we do. And so, Lucas, today is another installment of one of our favorite series. How about you set us up?
Yeah, so this is the fourth episode in our History of Music series. So we have been taking a long and extensive journey through the evolution of music, just kind of seeing how did we get to where we are and how did all of the musical components that we really take for granted now come to be. And we went really, really far back in our first episode in looking at ancient music. Going as all as back as 1500 BC, and then our second episode we looked at ancient Greece, at their music. Then our previous one in the series was on ancient Rome, and now we get to talk about music from the Dark Ages.
So what
I'm very excited about this.
So Dark Ages, for those of us that are not history buffs, what time period does this cover?
So this is the first half of what's called the medieval period or the Middle Ages. And the reason it's called the Dark Ages is because this is kind of the period right after the fall of Rome in 476 AD. And this is kind of when, like, I guess you could say high society and just civilization in general kind of reduces back into barbarism and just very rough living. Mm-hmm. The empire is disbanded. Everyone's for themselves. And it's just a time when technology really goes backwards, culture goes backwards. It's like almost everything reverts to the way it was like 700 years previous, with obviously, some things carrying over, but for the most part, people aren't living in large, beautiful cities anymore like they were in Rome or certain capitals of the Roman Empire. The barbarians came and just destroyed it all. And just the feudal system of government just kind of took control. This is where we get the beginnings of, our modern European countries. Just all of these regions that were once held by Rome just kind of all were left to fend for themselves, and they had to just create their own systems of government. So this is the beginnings of, the British people and the French and the Germans and the Spaniards and just all of these places, but they're not unified anymore. There's no real communication between them unless it's, they're fighting with each other.
Mm.
And so it's just a really dark time, as the name suggests. So that's kind of the period that we're looking at. We lose a lot of literature during this time, because when the barbarians, and this is the reason why I said in the last 2 episodes of this series that we have barely anything to kind of show for them in a lot of areas of culture. Anything that wasn't, architecture or sculpture, stuff that's not perishable. Anything that was paper was destroyed, because when the barbarians would come in, they would just burn everything. They weren't taking anything to preserve and to keep. And so much of our ancient literature, our music, our plays, and our poems, like, very little of it is left. And this is not a period where new stuff is being made. And a big reason is because of the barbarism that has taken hold, but there's also another reason. This is actually what's going to really transition to us into the music of this time. And it's the one, you could say, significant survivor of the Roman world, and that's the Roman Catholic Church. So even though the Roman Empire was disbanded, the Catholic Church really was able to solidify its power amongst all the different areas and have a unity. The Pope had all of its authority. In fact, it gained authority because it didn't have an emperor to answer to anymore. And the Pope was actually probably the most powerful person in the world for about 1,000 years almost.
Wow.
Might as well have been the emperor of the world, or at least of the Western world. And because the world was in such a dire environment, and because it was just, there was attacks on every front. There was, there's almost just like this fear of this evil world outside. The church put very strict rules on what culture could be and what it could not be. And so anything that was presented that was not religious was considered sinful and worldly and was punishable by death.
Oh, wow. Okay. The Inquisitors.
So, exactly. And so, the art and the architecture and the music that we do get from this time all has to be approved by the church. And so you don't have any secular artists, or at least not any that had their work preserved, because it was considered a crime.
Wow.
Yeah, so really the Catholic Church is going to be the driving force for the next couple episodes of this series. And what we'll go into now is just kind of looking at what the music was like. So there was only one style of music, and this music really doesn't change for about 800 years.
Oh, wow.
So we're looking at about 476, the fall of Rome, till about the year 1000. So it's about a 600-year period where there is absolutely no development no change in music.
Wow.
And that would be the style of music that we have in this episode, where it's pretty much fully vocal, kind of conducive to a monastic life.
Yes, exactly. So this style is called plain chant, although it now has the name Gregorian chant, which is probably the term that most people are familiar with, although I found that that's actually technically an incorrect term. It's called Gregorian chant because the musical style was developed during the time of Pope Gregory, but the thought behind it for a long time was that he himself came up with it, but that's actually not true. He just happened to be the Pope in charge when that musical style was first implemented. But the actual term for it is called plain chant.
So was this a style of music that was developed before 476, and it was just the only one that was allowed after?
No, it was about around 600 that this style was developed.
Oh wow!
But they took a long time, and they were very meticulous and strategic in how they made the music sound, because this type of music was not for public enjoyment.
Right.
And you could probably tell as you're listening to this, because what we're going to find is that this music is very, melodically sparse, as far as there's no hooks. There's not a lot of, Ethan was saying before we recorded, I was just like, I couldn't hum to any of these. And that's exactly what they're going for. This is music meant to put you in a calm, meditative, spiritual mood, for you to reflect upon the holy things, and for you to not think about the pleasures of your flesh.
So for that period of time between 476 and 600, we didn't have music.
Well, we just don't know what it was.
Okay.
Again, this was not only did we not have the advantages that we were losing in the previous episodes, but also the fact that just everything was so in flux. I'm sure that there was music. We didn't start having the music we know for sure today that we have. And a big reason is that we finally actually are writing music down during this period.
That's the thing that I enjoy the most about this episode, is like in the past episodes, we've been like, well, if it was this way, that's pretty cool.
Now
it's like, hey,
from now on, there is without a shadow of doubt that we are performing it exactly the way that it was intended. This is the oldest music in the world that is still faithfully recreated, at least in Western culture. I know that in some places, like in Eastern, in India, China, and those places, their music has lasted a long time. But as far as the trajectory we're looking at in Western music, this is as far back as we can go, and it's still being played today. And you go to a Roman Catholic Mass, especially in these European countries, this is still exactly what they do.
So are we using the way that we write music now?
No, but it is definitely the progenitor, like the prototype.
Okay.
So looking at the kind of sheet music that they use, you can see where the idea later comes. We'll actually look at that in our next episode when we finally get all of the notation that we use still today. This was an earlier form of it, but because of the fact that the Catholics were so persistent about learning it this way, just throughout in all of the monasteries still to this day, they just always have taught it the same way.
Yeah.
And so we are able to read it very easily if you know how to read it.
No.
So yeah, this music is, as you noticed, I'm sure listening, it is voice only.
Mhm.
Instruments are not allowed; it is forbidden
Why?
because because it's just meant to be a purely one-on-one encounter with God. You know, the instruments can be seen as merely adding substance, and that is not allowed.
That makes sense.
If you also notice, there's no harmony in any of the voices. They're all singing the same line.
Last time whenever we were talking about Roman music, we said that we were going to take a, like, because you had already done your research by this time, and
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't listened to the songs until very recently, and I was pretty, saying disappointed makes it sound like I'm like anti like this episode, but I was surprised that, because like whenever we were talking about the Roman music, because remember we had like weird instrumentation stuff going on and lots of experimentation
Yeah.
with like tension, and stuff
Mm-hmm.
speeding up and stuff like, like weird, like, like just weird stuff to just create drama. And whenever
Uh-huh.
I was listening to this, I was like, man, like we gained in that. Like, I think that there's more melodic structure, not in like a singable kind of way, but you know what I'm saying? Like there's more melodic
Mm-hmm.
interest even in that single line. But losing instruments was a big step backwards.
Yeah. As well as losing freedom to
And
experiment.
all harmony.
In all harmony,
I will
exactly.
say this, though, that listening through the songs, even though we didn't have much harmony, you could still feel a tonal center.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just like
Mm-hmm.
because the music we have now is built off of this music fundamentally, that
Yes.
that we can kind of, looking back now, fit chords to what they're singing, or our brains
Mm-hmm.
do that. But it is just I guess it kind of shows the power of melody in itself, that even just melody can carry a full song. A very simple song, but it is a full song.
So let's talk about the theory that they're using.
Not much.
So yeah, I mean, definitely theory has some way to go. At this time, there are only the 8 natural notes that are being used. But because there's really not, they don't use different keys because obviously they haven't started using the accidentals yet. That's not until later that they start adding that in.
There was one in one of these songs, I will say that.
Yeah, there was.
Well, yeah.
But it's still using the 8 notes.
Yeah. So what they're doing is they're using what's called the church modes.
Okay.
And it's the same modes that we talked about in our ancient Greek episode, where it's it's the same notes, but it's about where the tonal center is. So they're using Ionian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Phrygian, all that stuff.
The church.
So that's kind of the basis that they're centering everything around. And just again, the whole point is just we should also talk about the setting. So this music is only allowed to be played in church. You cannot play this music outside of church.
That's weird. That actually,
or like you die.
I mean, yeah. It's for not, because not only can it not be played, it cannot be performed by anyone except for male monks that have devoted their entire lives to God. The common man cannot perform this music. So they don't. It's not like church today where you have volunteer musicians that have ordinary lives elsewhere.
And this probably
You
wasn't
have
even something
to,
that unless they were just way more musically adept back then. Like, I don't even imagine this being a song where it's like, "Come on, everybody in the crowd, sing along." There were a
there's
couple of
no.
like back and forth chant kind of things, but like even those were pretty.
Yes, and
pretty
we'll get into that
complex.
later about different. There are different kinds of chants to give it some variety, and that was kind of a mission of also mine when I was picking out these songs. I wanted to have 6 songs that are definitely all different sounding from each other and have their own sound. But yeah, so that was part of their required training in the monasteries, is that they had to learn how to sing these songs. And they were super strict. Like, you could get beat for having one note out of tune.
This is
like
like
that's how serious they took it.
this is some
Because this
serious,
was such a
like,
sacred
religious statism. This is like a dystopian novel.
thing. Yeah, it really is once you start to read into it.
Wow. Okay.
Also, no women are allowed to perform. So in the instances that you hear higher voices, those are actually young boys. It's where we get the term choir boys.
Not that very final song in the thing.
Those are males. Those are young boys that their voices are still higher.
You can
but have already been donated.
What you want. Okay. I had to do that. I'm sorry.
So very, very strict rules. And what we're going to find is, as we go through these episodes, is that we're going to find that the Catholic Church, probably one of the things that they hate the most is change. They're very stubborn. They want things done the same way because they say so. It's a way of pretty much holding on to power over the people. It's really no secret that during this time, the Catholic Church was pretty corrupt. And, obviously there was some good out of it. You can have defenses that say that this was really probably the only way that culture was able to survive because life was so harsh during this time. This was a way for them to defend against the barbarism of the outside world. But at the same time, it was also pretty brutal inside the church as well.
So as far as the monastic life, I mean, what were kind of the rules to get in? I mean, obviously you had to be male, but like, was there a certain age where it's like, no, you are too old, you can't become a monk now?
Yeah, it's really so much of Star Wars and the idea of the Jedi Knights is based off of this principle. You are devoted and dedicated to the monastery when you're very young, and once you're there, you are there for life. It is a lifelong commitment, and pretty much like there's services going on all the time, and there's tons of different services that are required of the monks. Really we can thank the monks for they were our great transcribers. They are the reason the Bible still exists today. Faithfully copying it over and over and over again to make sure that it lasts, as well as the church would select specific historical documents, and it's the reason why we have some of our great works from the ancient world as well. And
so it wasn't the church that was trying to keep the history from being destroyed. It was the barbarians who destroyed that history, and the church who kept it from becoming, or kept it from progressing. It was a two-pronged attack.
Really, you could say that they were the civilized heart at the center of Europe during this time. They were really the ones that stemmed the tide
It
of
seemed like they were the
barbarism,
only ones that were even
because
bringing any kind of law and order, like consistently.
mm-hmm.
It's weird to think.
And it's a reason why.
Yeah.
And it's the reason why that they became the most powerful people in the world, is because, you know, they were even more powerful than the kings of that time. You know, kings really had to answer to the Pope. Yeah. And the Pope is the one that decides if you're going to be a king or not. You know, if you do something that the Pope doesn't like, he can have the people turn against you and have you dethroned.
That's true.
Like, it's powerful. Yeah. And, you know, it's not like how the Pope is today. It was very different.
So what ended, you said that this is the first half of the medieval kind of music period. Mm-hmm. What, I guess, without spoiling the next episode, like what defines the difference between halves?
So it's really when we start to introduce some new musical ideas, as well as the creation of the modern musical notation. Pretty much just finally you have some church leaders that are a little more forward thinking, that decide to introduce harmony back into things. And this is what we call monophonic music, where it's just one melody line throughout the whole song. And there's only one melody being played at a time. Even though there's a lot of people singing, they're all singing the exact same thing. It's with the introduction of polyphonic music, where you can have more than one melodic component working at the same time, that's when the next musical period begins.
It is kind of like we're starting over, because I feel like with Greek and like even more of those ancient music, they had a monophonic sound for a long time, and then they had to find their own harmonies again.
Yeah.
And then there's one last thing that's very important to know about Gregorian chant, and that's the language. All of it is in Latin. No matter what part of the continent you're in, no matter what region you're in, it is Latin. It is the language of the Roman Church, and that's by design, because at that point, no one spoke Latin anymore. There's another reason why people did not sing along. The people are not meant to understand what is being said. Also, if you have to think about in this time, people didn't have their own Bibles, because the only Bibles were in Latin, and those Bibles were in the church. And so when people would come to services and listen to this music, it was not meant, you know, it's not like today where you've got the words on the screen and you're encouraging everyone to sing along. This is very much all about putting people in almost like a spiritual trance, and just engulfing them in this atmosphere of reverence and meditation. And, you know, it's, while you're at this time, this is your time to like pretty much pray and, you know, make sure that you're right with God.
So I guess, right, the Catholic Church was, like you said, very prominent politically. So obviously there were churches around Europe, and the common man was allowed to attend, I would assume.
Oh yeah, it was required.
Okay. And would this singing occur during like the masses back then?
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
That's what I had thought. I just, you know, was making sure. And then of course, obviously.
And then of course, you know, the actual speaking by the priest would be in their language, because obviously they need to be able to understand. But the singing, all in Latin.
And they wouldn't be able to read their own Bible because it was all in Latin and nobody knew it.
Yeah. Now, it wasn't until the Renaissance that we start, and the Protestant Reformation
But
with Martin Luther, that's when we actually start to have, the Bible entering people's homes for the first time.
right, and that was a very significant event, which ended the Middle Ages supposedly, or helped bring it in. But
it was one of the big things.
Events,
It falls under the kind of the whole Renaissance period where just everything kind of went into hyperspeed.
So how was it by design? Obviously, it was by design, but how was it, and why was it by design that the people wouldn't be able to read the scriptures for themselves? Was that like a method of control, or was it just like we want to keep the scriptures?
Well, it was also so that way, that the Catholic Church could come up with their own rituals and say that it's biblical when it actually wasn't. The idea of penance and confession, and that those are all not biblical ideas. Those are Catholic ideas. But because they're not able to verify on their own that that's not biblical, they have to just take the priests at their word.
So it was a method of control.
Absolutely, it was. There was a fear of the common man being able to interpret the Bible for himself. They did see it from, I guess you could say, a good intention at first, although it led to serious corruption down the road of, they took spiritual matters so seriously. It was the gravest thing in the entire world. And they, I guess, feared that people, especially people of low intelligence, would interpret it incorrectly and would spread blasphemy and immorality because they're just common folk. They cannot possibly understand this super important spiritual text. It is our job to communicate it for them, and they have to trust what we're saying because we're the experts.
Man. Yeah.
So it is kind of weird, but at least it had good intentions at the start. But like most bad things do.
or at least it can be seen that way. Who knows if ever that was how it started, but you could argue that that's the thinking that they were looking at. But I mean, obviously now we all know that was very seriously abused pretty quickly. Especially as they realized how much power they had and how much money they could make.
Yes.
I mean, you look at all those huge cathedrals that were built during this time. That was all because of the fact that, those were not government ordained projects. Those were church ordained projects from the common people's money.
Man.
Right.
And, just if they don't have a Bible, you can say this is biblical. And they literally have, and because of the fact that if you say that's not biblical, they'll kill you and make an example of you. They'll demand you, they'll call you a heretic.
Was this the witch hunting era? Or is that later? Okay.
No. That's later.
And this wasn't the Black Death era either.
No. That's at the beginning of the high Middle Ages. In fact, that's one of the turning points of just kind of civilization going, we were on the brink of destruction. We've got to start making changes.
And we did have the first Crusades during this era. From what I remember, right? Towards the end.
No, I think that there may have been some at the very end, but that's also mostly a high Middle Ages
Do we
thing
have
as well.
any major historical events during this time?
Yeah, I mean, you do have the establishments of, the modern kingdoms. If you've ever heard of King Charlemagne, this was during this time. He's pretty much the man that kind of not only brought about the rise of England, but the rise of France as well. And, his rule is kind of considered like he's like the first great king Um, you really don't have a lot of, I guess you could say, a lot of big iconic moments during this time. Obviously you've still got the Ottoman Empire in the East, which was pretty much just the Eastern Roman Empire that was able to withstand the barbarian hordes. But they didn't remain as the Roman Empire. They remained, they became the Ottoman or the Turkish Empire. And that's kind of where, Eastern Orthodox religion comes from. They lasted until about the 1400s, and that was mostly, they had all that going on over there. So really, that's kind of another reason why it's the Dark Ages. There's just not a lot going on. Everything is remaining stagnant during this time. Not only did we take a big step backwards, but we also didn't move anywhere.
And this was really before any kind of
I would say
globalism was happening. So like pretty much everyone
that
absolutely was doing anything musical
because we just came out of a period of immense globalism, the biggest globalism at that point. Rome controlled most of the known world at that time, because obviously no one knew that the Americas were out in the middle of the ocean.
And the Far East was just still far away.
Yeah, and so as far as what was considered the modern world, Rome controlled pretty much all of it. And what we're going to see, and this is going to really help us set a standard, because this is the beginning of the pattern that we're going to see time and time again as we move through the series. Whatever musical style comes before it, the next one is going to try and do the opposite. There's always going to be this reaction against what comes before. So and of course, once we move forward, it'll seem like it's more subtle. But in this is a very drastic change from episode to episode.
Yeah. Right.
But there's always going to be some reason why the next musical form is rebelling against the previous one.
Yeah.
And it's the reason why we have these musical styles that change. Usually it's not super smooth. It's all of a sudden, you have these new artists that come in and says, this way is done. It is old. It is overused. It's time to do something new. And then the new wave just comes in.
Well, the good old church.
Well, I feel like
and they're going to be a major topic of discussion over the next probably 4 or 5 episodes in this series. They have a hand in shaping or resisting whatever musical styles are going to be coming through.
If you could give us a little bit of what life would be like for the common person outside of the church, just because if you can. I mean, just because we don't know very much. We kind of have a better idea for the other 3, but as far as the Dark Ages, it's like, obviously there was feudalism, there were kings, your land was kind of owned by the king, and your work was kind of owned by your whatever monarch, and you had to serve the job that was given to you.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much for the most part, most people were peasants or farmers. And the church was kind of their one area of life where they kind of got to experience something that was higher civilization. But for the most part, they really kind of didn't care who their kings were, whether they were good rulers or bad rulers, because their lives pretty much never changed. They're born, they work, they die. That was pretty much the extent of it. And the church was actually a place of refuge and peace.
So the church was good for their morale. It was the morale booster of the time. as
Exactly. It's another reason why I believe that the church is the reason that
And
civilization
I also
survived.
think
It's one of, for a
I
lot of
also
people, it's
think
what gave them
with
hope.
with most things in this world, I think that the upper echelons of the Catholic Church were doing some pretty bad things, but I think that a lot of the smaller churches and like the kind of the boots on the ground, like pastors that got into it for the right reasons, were good.
Yeah. I think that it's easy to demonize the Catholic Church. While of course they were not perfect and they did some pretty bad things. I think that especially in today's climate, it's easy to forget about the good that they did do.
Yeah.
And just, if you were to remove them from the equation, we would have an infinitely different future if we even have one.
Man.
For better or for worse, we are here today because of the Roman Catholic Church. There's just no question about it.
Crazy.
And people still listen to Gregorian chant today, even outside of the church. There was kind of a pretty crazy revival of it in the 80s and 90s. As far as just like, people buying albums, and I've talked to several people before that actually listen to it on a regular basis just to put it on to like have a calm atmosphere. Like they'll put it on just like I like to listen to it while I work because it relaxes my mind, or I like to go to sleep listening to it. People aren't listening to it because they want to sing along or hum the melodies, but it still is effective in doing exactly what it set out to do, which is to calm the mind, calm the spirit, and create this atmosphere of one-on-one experience with God. And the fact that it still has that power to do it, I think, is actually one of its secret brilliances. Yes, it was probably used for a method of control back then alongside of it, but you kind of almost can't deny the effect that it's had. It did exactly what it set out to do.
It's what a good artist does.
And it's the reason why it lasted for so long and still lasts to this day.
That's crazy to think that. Because we don't go out buying ancient Roman music albums.
Nope. It's the reason why it was so hard to find songs for the previous 3 episodes. But once I got to this, I almost had way too much to go through. There's so much of it. And also, there were a lot of songs written this time, which actually leads me to a point that I didn't even mention. We still do not have composers.
Oh.
We do not have names on the songs of who wrote them because that was considered vanity at that time. When you write a song, it is the authorship of the church as a whole, because that's pride to say that I made this song. Look at the work that I made. That was not allowed. So we still actually don't know who wrote these songs. They're anonymous.
That's kind of a good point, because it sort of brings me to something I kind of wanted to say with these songs. It sounds very community oriented, almost collectivist in like in a weird utopian sort of, more like dystopian sort of way, where it's a loss of like the individual as far as the performers, that that unless it's like one of those call and response where it's just, or there's kind of a sense of a leader and then the followers musically, for the most part these songs sound very, it's just voices, it's not performers. But I get the image of like faceless, hooded figures that are singing in, a dark or rainy monastery with concrete walls, and it's it doesn't feel like the Baroque era where you're in a grandiose church and everything's made of gold and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like that. It feels very collectivist in a negative way, but still very peaceful. Like they're content with it. But yeah. I don't know what you can draw from that, but that's just the feeling that I got.
Well, if you guys don't have anything else.
Yeah, let's talk about the songs next.
All right, so we'll go ahead and take a break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about the 6 Gregorian chants that we have picked for this episode. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Good Music Podcast. We just finished talking about the Middle Ages and the Gregorian chanting that occurs during this time period. We're talking about anything from the fall of Rome to about 1000 AD. And now it's time to talk about the 6 songs that we have selected for this episode. So, for those of you who do not know what I'm talking about, 6 songs, what is this segment? Well, you're new. Welcome. And Lucas, could you explain to them so they're not so confused?
Yes, I will. So the 6 songs are a little bit different in these kinds of episodes, but normally what I'm doing is I'm picking 6 songs to either represent an artist or, in this case, a musical era and style. And so this is going to be our way to concretely talk about all the things that we just talked about in our first segment. And this is going to be your introduction to Gregorian chant. So if you've never listened to it before, I'm going to kind of give you a bit of a wide selection of the different kinds of Gregorian chants you might hear. So, and then I also tried to order them in a way to where there's kind of a flow from start to finish. So it's not just a random collection of songs, but if you take the time and just kind of sit, with Gregorian chant, you'll probably want to like find a nice quiet room, sit, close your eyes, and just let the music kind of take you on its journey. The way that you can listen to these songs is there's a link in the description of the episode. I'll take you to a Spotify playlist, and that's where you'll be able to find the songs. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into the first song, which, Ethan, you were very shocked to know that this song was as old as it is. And that's Ave Maria.
And I'm shocked to hear that this is the original version.
Yep.
Because all the Ave Marias that I know are like that modern interpretation.
Well, so the modern interpretation is from the 19th century. Composer named Franz Schubert. And he's one of the most famous composers of his time. He's kind of the one that did the modern reimagining of it, and because he made it for more of an operatic flavor. And so, but I mean the root is still there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he didn't rewrite the song with a new melody. It's pretty much, just a modern interpretation. So whenever people play Ave Maria today, they're more leaning on the Schubert version, but it's still, the root of it is all the way back from the Dark Ages.
Who is Maria?
That is Mother Mary.
Classic.
That makes sense.
So Ave Maria translates to Hail Mary.
Oh, like the football play.
Yep.
Oh,
like
yeah.
The football
play. Wrong.
Yes. No, I know what you're talking about. The prayer, it's like Hail Mary, Mother of Jesus. That's how it starts.
Yep.
I don't know the rest of it.
Yeah, it's pretty much just it's a prayer to Mary. Very simple.
And this is like just the prayer.
Yeah.
Sung.
That's what most Gregorian chants are. Is their prayers put to music.
Huh.
So when they did the Hail Marys, were they always in Latin?
No, I mean, like whenever they would do those. Oh wait, you're thinking about the prayers.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like when they literally.
No, because again, the common person did not speak Latin, so they would whenever they were praying themselves, they would use it in their own language, but the song is in Latin.
Okay.
So
it's pretty.
So
It's pretty difficult to, because I always try to think like, what's my favorite part of the song? But I think that comes like
this is going to be very difficult for this episode.
Well, that's right. If you haven't listened to the songs, by the way, like if you're not on the Spotify playlist and you haven't listened to the songs, it's really especially for these, it's important because I think I'm probably going to start taking more of the stance of like, what all did we lose in Roman music, into now? Because like we talked about in the first segment, where it's like it's all just like it's a bunch of voices, but like there's no harmonies. It's just one line the whole time,
And there's not your typical song structure where you have verses, choruses.
Mm-mm.
Like the songs pretty much move in a linear fashion.
Well, it's because it's a prayer.
Yeah.
So no
if anything, you may have a repetition. Like if you get to the halfway point and then you just start the whole thing over and sing maybe the same melody line but with slightly different words. But that's about as repetition as you're going to get.
I will say, though, musically, for all the shade that I'm throwing at it, I will say that they did accomplish their goal, because whenever I would listen to this in the car, it was the experience that I had listening to it was genuine to what the song wanted. It's just like the kind of the world just slowed down, and I was just like, huh. And once like my musical mind got past like analyzing it, and I would just listen through it again, it was just like, yeah, like it's kind of like, in a weird kind of way, it's like, how if you're like studying for a test, or like whenever we were in school or whatever, it's like you are working from home, it's like you put on like background music. Like it's something that I need there, but like my mind can like it allows my mind to like be on other things. That's how I felt about this song.
Yeah, and there's this is going to kind of introduce an interesting concept about how we cannot listen to all music the same way. This is a music that if you try and listen to it with your analytical brain, you're going to get kind of frustrated. Because first off, it's not intended to, and second off, you really just can't unless you're a crazy genius that knows exactly every note they're singing as they're singing it. And even in that case, it's not going to be that interesting.
No.
This is music that's meant to be felt. You're supposed to listen to it with your soul, with your feelings, with your spirit.
Once I got past, like in a weird kind of way, and I said like at the very beginning before we were even recording, I was like, I couldn't hum it, and at first that bothered me, but then I think it's once you let go of like your Western ear,
yeah,
and you're just like, it's actually in a weird way, like for my brain, like freeing that I never like I listened to this song a bunch, and no matter how many times I've listened to it, I haven't been able to like pick up on any part of the song. And then I just gave up on trying to like learn it, and just accepted that it's like, I can just put this on and just like not ever hear it in a weird kind of way.
Like just let it take you where it wants to take you. So I think that's the point that you want to start getting to with with these songs is that, our tendency is we want to try and listen to it the way that we listen to other music.
Oh yeah.
And with this,
especially coming
it's
off
gonna
of Roman music,
where
we were in Roman music, we were talking about like the tension, like the voices, there were harmonies, like we were commenting on like implied chords, and now it's like we kept the implied chords in a weird kind of way, but
in a very different way.
But yeah,
yes.
I think back when the Romans were doing things, they were doing it for entertainment purposes. And now that we're here, we're definitely not doing it for entertainment purposes.
And there was a serious amount of repetition, like theme and stuff, going on with the Roman music.
Yeah, there was.
And the repetition that we see in the rest of this set is either super, super overdone or just non-existent, or at least at the point where you can't even notice it.
Yeah.
And that's something that our ears pick up on with our Western music, is it's built all around that slightly unexpected but also slightly expected musical idea. That's why we love verses and choruses, because it's like,
almost,
we get that.
Yeah, Western music has almost trained us that if it doesn't require that, then it has to be bad music. If something's not hummable or doesn't have any kind of melodic structure to it, then it's bad. And I think that this is such an interesting challenge of that notion.
Yeah, that gets into, have you listened to all those more existential music questions where it's like, what makes it music, and what makes music and what makes art? But I think it's good music if they accomplish what they set out to do.
And they absolutely have.
I think art is good art whenever they accomplish what they had set out to do.
They definitely accomplished what they set out to do, because I don't know how I'd start singing along to it.
Right.
But it does feel very relaxing. I mean, the way that we mix things now to mix things to be relaxing is add a lot of reverb. Our ears love reverb just naturally, unless you're wanting to pick out exactly how to play something. But if you drench a very simple melody with reverb, then your ear goes, wow, space, time, existence. And it doesn't really matter what's being played. It wants to sense the space that's around you. And I think that the recording that has been done for these songs did that very, very well. And so the preservation that we have was really good.
That's because they were recorded authentically, and they're performed by real monks. It's not people recreating what the monks are doing. They're filming them, the actual monks, in their actual cathedrals.
Wow.
So it's, this is an authentic performance, not by pretenders, or imitators, by, the people that were intended to sing this music in the place that they're intended to be sung.
Then that's probably why it's got so much power to it.
Mm-hmm. You can
this is not done in a studio.
You can imagine yourself like sitting in like an empty cathedral.
Right.
Yeah. And actually, I kind of have a little bit of a cool story. So when I was in 2012, I actually got to take a school trip to France, and I got to sit in one of those services, and it was pretty cool. And they did do music like this.
Cool.
It was my first ever. It was my first ever exposure to it. We were like in this Gothic French castle on Sunday morning, and it was pretty awesome. They had the incense and everything.
That actually sounds really cool.
Yeah, so it's all authentic. So, was there anything else that stood out to you guys? Are you ready to move on to the next?
I'm ready to move on. I think we've proposed the theme for the rest of the set,
Yeah.
I think that song has served its purpose.
But this next one is the first. It's a stylistic change.
Yes, and so I wanted to take a brief moment and just because we're not going to be able to describe as much musical components, let's talk about the mood of the set and how each song fits into where it is, and kind of tell us how, when you're listening to the set, kind of how the set guided you emotionally as we went. So we have the first song. It's a well-known song, probably the most. Ave Maria is probably the most famous Gregorian chant.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, with its continued use in popular culture today, but it's also fairly short. It's a good. I wanted to use it as an introduction. I didn't want to throw a 7-minute song right at the very front. But we do have a very different change. So I'm going to try and say this correctly. The Benedicamus Patrum.
I probably
semicolon
would have pronounced
3.
it the exact same way. Semicolon 3.
So, now that we know that these are actually being authentically performed, so when it says monks of the Abbey of Notre Dame, that's legit. That's where it's the monks of Notre Dame performing this in Notre Dame.
Oh wow! So,
which I think is pretty cool.
This song is a lot simpler than the first one. It sounds less like rambling, and we kind of have like 2 notes pretty much the whole time. And there is a call and response. This is what I was talking about with it sounds like there's some leader, a musical leader.
Yep.
But still kind of like the feeling of them all being faceless. They have no real identity. It's still everyone singing together. They're just
and they're saying the same thing. It's a call and response.
Right.
So this style is called responsorium.
Responsorium makes sense.
And so pretty much it's just you have a leader that says one line, you have the group that echoes the same words and same melodic line.
So
now,
go ahead. Go ahead.
This is a song that I actually could not find the translation to. This was one of the ones that is not one of the popular ones. It was just one I heard, and I was like, this I think could be an interesting texture for the set. But I was able to kind of do some digging on the language I could pick up. And pretty much what this is, it derives from the word benediction. This is pretty much just Lord bless you, keep you type prayer. Bless the Father, bless the Son, bless the Holy Ghost. Bless the saints, bless. And that's what each line they're doing is they're blessing something else.
So you talked a little bit right at the end of the last song about the different emotions that these songs portray. And obviously this song and the last song would be a little bit happy. We would have positive emotions. Throughout this set, are we changing to different positive emotions? Do we ever get negative? And what is that?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
Because some of these are used for funerals.
Okay. I guess services. We can talk about that when we get there. I just was wanting to know what direction we're going. Okay.
That's interesting. I would not have given the second song like the happy connotation.
I wouldn't either. It feels more solemn and a bit more like, we have our opening, song, and then it's kind of like it's almost like we're bringing things down here.
It feels almost robotic in a weird kind of way, like very.
It sounds like the guys from Galaxy Quest. We are going to go to the spaceship now. That's because they're on the 5 and the major third. As opposed to like it. You could also argue that it's like the
1 and the 6.
6, but I don't hear it as the 1 and the 6.
What?
That was very much like
No.
a 5 to the major third.
That's not what I'm getting on it at all. That's probably why
That's why
so
to me it sounded kind of optimistic.
Oh, theory fight.
Whatever.
Theory fight.
It's okay. It's just the different way we hear it, and that probably has to do with the key that it's in. Because when you have a melody like this that's very, very simple, your ears are still going to try to fit chords to it. So it's just a natural byproduct of maybe me and Ethan listening to different kinds of music that are in different keys.
Yeah. So there's probably a possibility that some people are going to listen to this and not like the sound of his voice.
Yes.
But I actually really like it because I really like it. Almost just again creates this mood. It's almost like there's something a little off about it that kind of adds a little bit of suspense, in my opinion.
You're talking about this vocalist like he's the lead singer of Diction or something.
Yeah, to where there's just you kind of, it almost creates this musical tension that ends up really not going anywhere, that I think is actually in a way effective and maybe was not the intention. But there's something almost like there's an anticipation of something going to change because you have these two notes that are being repeated over and over again in this kind of this quaking, almost kind of crazy sounding voice in another language. I think like we're kind of conditioned like in horror movies, you expect to hear this before like something bad happens.
Right. Or Ghost albums right before the rest of the band comes in.
Yeah.
This whole set kept making me want to listen to Infestus Amon just because it reminded me of that. Because they open with the Gregorian chant style thing, and I think they use it very well the way that you just described, where it's like it's very subdued, kind of low pitch. You don't really understand the language. It's not clearly right in front of you.
There's something
feel.
Because of the fact that our music has changed so much, there's almost this inherent alienness to this kind of music.
Yeah.
Because we don't hear stuff like this being played anymore. And usually whenever you have music that's not, I guess, and by our ears considered beautiful, that's voices, especially groups of voices alone with no musical accompaniment, it's usually always used to elicit a negative emotion.
Yeah.
Or a very grandiose feeling.
And so it's almost like it's just, again, there's a little bit of a retraining of our brain, but at the same time we can kind of embrace some of the emotions that we're unintentionally getting to kind of create something more than what the original author of the music intended.
Yeah.
Do you think this was something that the crowd would have repeated?
No, because again, they don't speak Latin.
Man. It's so strange.
It's just foreign to us, man. It's like,
it's like why even
where's
have
the projector screen?
Why even have a back and forth repeating part whenever no one else can even repeat except for the people that already know it?
That's a really great question.
He's not going to answer.
And moving on,
I have a couple
song.
I have a couple theories on why, but a lot of times stuff like this, there can be sacraments and rites going on while this is being sung. It doesn't necessarily mean they're singing that everyone is sitting watching. You could have baptisms going on during this time. You could have, people entering and exiting. I have a feeling this is the kind of song that would play not for just people to just sit and look at. That there's probably some religious
thing happening.
Yeah, to complement it. So that's my hypothesis, but I don't have the actual
I
evidence
definitely
to say
think
yes.
Mood wise, it's again. I keep imagining myself like if I was like sitting in the church, while this was happening. I don't know if I would say unsettling, because it's not like there's not an enormous amount of tension, But
yeah, but it's like just enough to kind of.
It definitely like hones my focus. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the best way I can say it. Is it's enough to like laser beam my focus in, because it's repetitive, but it's also intriguing, and it's like not complicated enough. But I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to understand the repetition of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so it repeats so much, but it also repeats so little. I don't know how to describe it.
But again, it drew your focus in, and that's exactly what it wanted to do. So once again, it was successful in what it was aiming for. And that's to put your mind away. They don't want you thinking about your normal day. They don't want you thinking about what you're going to be doing later when you leave church. Their goal is when you're there, once the music starts, you are thinking about religious things.
Yeah.
And so, they want you to focus. And so the fact that you're saying that it made you focus in on what's happening means that they did exactly what they wanted.
Yep.
Well, I think we can go ahead and move on to the next song.
This is my favorite one. And I will say that it's my favorite one because I can remember part of the melody. And that's the only one. This is the only one that I can remember part of. And it also, it lended itself to some interest. It could have gone many different ways, but I think we're not there musically here yet to be able to do the crazy suspensions from the major 7 to the major 6 that I was feeling like it should have hit at some point. And this song, by the way, is...
We'll just call it In Paradisum.
Let's do that. That sounds great, because the real title is very long, and we'll get longer as we go. But it sounded to me at points like it was going to turn into like the Star Trek Final Frontier theme. And Ethan, if you know what I'm talking about, it's one of those that has like a Lydian suspension over the 1.
I'm sorry, I never watched Star Trek.
Well, okay, but it has a suspension from the major 7 to the major 6. Now this song doesn't do that, but when they actually sing the chorus, when they actually sing In Paradisum, there's a melody that follows right after that sounds like they're going to go up there, and it's just it kept wanting me to like make them like move the melody that way, but it didn't. And so I remember that feeling of frustration, which I don't think was the intention, but that's why I remember this song. Is because
and of course none of them are listening with the same musical brain that you are, and so they're not even thinking that someone's going to be mad that it didn't go this way or that way musically.
Well, they probably don't care either. Because that's not the purpose is not for me to pick out every note. I still enjoyed the song, and I really liked it still, but and I think that was why. I think it's because I was listening for that. I was listening closer to the song, and I was listening closer to that feeling of the suspension, not necessarily the notes themselves. And so I was waiting and waiting for that hook to come back, and every time it came back, I was like, oh, this is the time where they're going to do it. But and so I noticed the hook more, and I noticed the melodies more. And so whether that was, or that obviously was not the design, but it ended up working in the favor of this song that I ended up remembering it more.
I think I'll agree with you and say this is my favorite of the set as well. It's the one that I would say melodically that melody stuck with me more than any of the others. Yeah. That or that's not how it goes, but I can hear it in my head. Listen, you can listen to us horribly butcher these lines. We would be beaten by the church for being out of tune.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I wouldn't want to be.
I will say they slowly descend in their key center over time because it's just voices.
Oh, really?
Did you guys pick up on that?
No.
I did not pick up on that.
Yeah, they
Although
go
I'm
down by like a whole step by the end of the song.
I'm not surprised.
I'd be very curious to know if that was intentional.
Lucas, you're very rare in that you don't descend your tonal center when you're singing a cappella. Most people, especially me, will go down and down and down. I mean, even like Taylor Swift will sing flat, slightly flat.
Oh, yeah.
And so that just, you will then sing flat, and then you will hear yourself flat, and that very small correction will end up moving you down and down and down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to not listen with as a critical ear for those things.
I only noticed it because whenever I was going back and re-listening to this, it got to the end and I wanted to listen to it again, and then I popped it back and I was like, whoa.
Okay.
I wouldn't have noticed that.
Like if you're just listening through it in the set, it's just like, okay. But like if you like play it through the end and then you restart it at the beginning, you'll be like, what the heck? But it's like it's voices, and it's a bunch of voices, and so I'm
gonna do that.
There's already a little bit of intonality just because there's like 20 people singing it, or whatever.
And there's no musical accompaniment to kind of keep them.
But like if one of them is a little bit flat, everyone kind of adjusts a little bit, like it's not like one person that can keep themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so just over time they just fell. Well, it's not like bad on them. I think that probably happens with most choirs that don't have like in-ears.
Yeah, and I would say that they probably don't get beaten in modern times.
Well, they should have.
So, oh gosh, that's brutal. So, this song is a funeral song, one of the 2 funeral songs on our set. But this is a song that's, it's meant to be like a, rejoice, they're in a better, it's why it's called In Paradisium, the person is in paradise. And so it's kind of meant to be a bit more of a, a happier, much more so than the other one that's on this set.
Okay.
Which we'll get to later on. So that's what's going on.
That's probably why it sounded very happy. You were like, "Oh, it's a funeral song." And I'm like, "Well, but it's also called In Paradise," and so to me, it seems like they all are working for the moment. Well, okay, working they're not really doing much. They're singing, but like they're waiting for that time that they can leave the earth. Like that is the goal. Is for
Yeah,
them to leave
especially for
heaven.
so many of the working class people. That's like death is the sweet release.
Although at the same time they believed in purgatory. And so I
That's
don't
true.
know how they reconcile that with this song. Maybe it's like, oh, this person was really, really good, so they don't even go to purgatory. I don't know.
Well,
If you had enough money.
yeah, that's
Oh
true.
boy.
Or if you lived a really good life.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you lived a monastic life, I'm sure you would be considered living of a good life. So
This song, again, all these songs are very good, like attention grabbers, you know? Because like whenever you're listening to these, it's like, even if like, because on this one, like there were some like the na 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 na, like we can kind of hear different melodic components, but in a weird way, even before knowing like that, it's like if you're not like a choir boy, you can't sing these, you know, like you're not allowed to sing these. In a weird way though, whenever I was listening to it, it's like whenever I would whenever I would try to hum it along with them, I would be like, I'm taking away from I feel like what I'm supposed to be doing for the song. You know what I mean? Like whenever I would try to like participate, even like by myself, I would like stop participating because I was like, I just feel like this is more for listening. You know? Like it's just written in that way where it's like I feel like I should stop and just listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like the whole entire vibe is like, it's like, and maybe it's because I already know a little bit about Gregorian, like, and like this vibe, but in a weird way, it's like it does feel like almost even like disrespectful to like if this was happening, like it would feel disrespectful to talk while this was going on. You know what I mean? Because it does have like kind of that religious flair to it in the way that it's composed.
It's just strengthening the argument more and more that, you know, they had a specific goal in mind with this music, and even us today in the modern world, like we're unconsciously, you know, obeying exactly what they would want us to do, which is to not talk, to not participate, to just be in the moment and experience the music. And you know, you were feeling that way even before I explained kind of all of the criteria that went along with it, which I just think is very fascinating. So with that, I think we can go ahead and move on to the next song.
Move on to the next song, which is not the Mr.
Kyrie
song.
No, which is a great
Unfortunately,
song.
I actually am familiar with this song. And not this version of it. There's a different version of it that my high school choir, we did it in a round. And
yeah, this is another song that's been adapted several times.
And so
I would say this is another one of the big Gregorian chants.
And so it's kind of like the lyrics that I remember it being are very solemn, actually. It's actually like basically God help us.
Yeah, this is a prayer of repentance. It's the first line is, "Oh God, please forgive us."
It sounds repeated over and over and over again.
Yes, it is. This is a very simple song. It kind of more in the vein of an Ave Maria.
But are the lyrics repeated?
I believe so.
Okay. That's what it sounded like to me. It sounded like the full 2 minutes or whatever it was just them saying something over and over and over again, which is kind of like the whole, like when teachers would like punish the kids of like uh, writing something on the board for like 100 times. And no, for real. And monks would do that to themselves supposedly during this time. Is like they would like whip themselves and like torture themselves and stuff. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this was, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just guessing here, that this was a song that they would sing to themselves to like make themselves feel bad for having sinned or something.
I don't think that they would, because again, even if you are a priest, you don't sing songs just yourself. You have to be singing them
Right.
in the actual setting of church. But I mean, yeah, it's, I bet that they are singing just as much for themselves as they are, the audience or the congregation that's there. But it's, it's meant for everybody. It's not just meant for the monks to sing. This is a call for everyone to repent, even though again they can't understand the words. It does create that sense of, it's very possible again that whoever is the priest in that dialect is saying, this is the time that we're gonna, if you have any sins to confess, please make your way to the booths, and a father will be there to administer penance. So even if they don't understand in the moment every word that's being said, it's probably very likely that they understand the meaning of each song and what what's
It's like a
happening.
musical prompt at that point. Like if you had been going to church for like 3 years back then, like in every time that it was like time to like confess, this song came on, like you'd start getting the cue.
It's the offering song.
Yeah.
Can we rename the song to that? All right, everyone, it's time to sing the offering song.
Yeah, my grandparents were Methodists, and so like I'm not used to the very like Methodist kind of customs where they would like do the same thing over again and say the same thing over again. Like when they were finished reading scripture, they'd say like, this is the word of God for the people of God, and everyone would say, thanks be to God. That's something that it didn't weird me out. I thought it was kind of cool. And I kind of think that like a lot of the customs during Mass are kind of cool as well. It's just I don't think much of it, but it's interesting to just this whole time. It's very interesting to kind of talk about just some of the things that they did in Catholic Church during the medieval times, I guess. And so I mean, they did have offerings during this time, right? They did have tithing and whatever, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
that's how they had so much money.
Well, but they also did it from other things. I didn't know if it was like that sort of, and I'm sure if you was the control, was it mind control or was it like iron fist control? Did they, put people to death for not tithing, or was that just not a problem? Did people just feel like that was the what you should do? I guess.
I'd say it's probably a little bit of both. The times when people don't and step out of line, there are people that are made examples of, but rebellion back in that time was very rare.
And I would also say I would probably put on more of the mind control spectrum, because anytime that anyone quote unquote stepped out of line, the punishment, it wasn't just like a dictatorial government that was just like, you're punished, you know. There was propaganda that came along with it, which was like, you are evil and you are unholy and you are against God. And so because you're against God, we, the church, are going to deal with that. And now we're going to punish you. It was a punishment for being unholy, not a punishment for being out of line necessarily.
Yeah. It was all about how you spin it.
And then the church can pretty much like say anything that they want about, like, cast whatever judgment upon you as propaganda that they want to, and no one's going to question their say.
Mm-hmm. The Catholic Church were the masters of torture back then. Like when someone was deemed a heretic and a blasphemer, they did not die a quick, easy death. It was a long, painful death. Some of the most brutal styles of execution were created by the Roman Catholic Church.
Okay.
Including the Iron Maiden.
Oh, yes. The walk-in closet that's actually just a giant spiky booth.
I heard that was a
giant spiky
booth. That's the thing.
No.
Yeah, that's what.
Oh, that's real.
Iron Maiden was.
Those were real.
It's Indespicable Me. I thought it was just something that was kind of there when I first saw it as a kid.
I think that the worst of the ways to die back then would have been like that, like, golden calf thing that they put you in.
What?
You guys not heard of this?
Well, I might be thinking of what it is. Explain it.
So, and I don't know who invented this. They messed up. It was like this brass cow, and they would strip you naked, and they would throw you in, and they would lock this, like, it was the size of a cow. And so there was this door on the side that was also made of brass, and they would open it, and then they would put you inside of this hollow brass cow, and they would close it, and then they would light a fire under it. And the only way that you could breathe was there was like this kind of like tube thing that connected to where the mouth of the cow was. And so as your skin was falling off from the heat of the brass, you would just hear screaming from out of the mouth of the cow, but it would sound like a moo.
That is so bad. That's like a saw trap.
And so they would bring prisoners of war in these, they would roll them out burning, and they would have those like in the front lines to scare their enemies. Because if they captured you alive, that's what they would do to you. And so they would have like multiple of those on the battlefield.
Dang. Yeah, that's very metal.
That's more than metal. In metal, it's just kill them all.
That's more than metal. It's Catholic.
It's
the screaming cow.
All right. Well, I'm sure they would be singing "God Help Us" while they were. They would be singing "Kyrie, help us." I'm trying to tie it back. Look at that, full circle, perfect tie.
Good job. You did it. We'll go ahead and move on to the next song.
This one has a really long title, and I don't know which I should use. I'm going to pick the last part.
Yes, and that would be correct.
Hodie nobis caelorum rex.
Okay. Yeah, so this is a Christmas song. This is something you would sing during Christmas Mass.
Oh,
cool. Was it happy? Yay.
Yes, this was about the birth of Jesus.
We're singing with the minor 6 as the total root, and we have a flat 7 thrown in there.
Yeah, I did not pick up on this being happy. None of these have been happy.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a certain amount of, they're not going to have, oh, praise the Lord, everyone is joyful. Like, those aren't the kind of songs that they're going to be
Our sense of
singing.
happy and sad,
But
in the modern sense, are built off of a lot of things that have happened between now and then.
That's true.
And so, specifically,
But I felt like Roman music had music that sounded happy.
Well, I mean, but that was just our interpretation. We don't really know.
that could very much be, biased by our, because again, these are just guesses. Right. So it is possible that that's just our musical modern biases that are filtering into how they're playing that music. Again, this is the authentic interpretation of this music, and so there's no question that these are the words, and this is how it's supposed to sound.
Like we in the modern era have much more than just major and minor, and even at this point, we really didn't have much major and minor stuff going on because we didn't have a lot of harmony going on, and so there wasn't this sense of major is happy and minor is sad. I mean, there obviously isn't, because this song was in minor with a flat 7, and with a flat 2, and we see it as very sad. It's objectively on sheet music sad according to modern standards, but this is apparently a happy song. And then also compound on that instrumentation and tempo and what the percussion is doing and the harmonies and yada yada yada, and also the lyrics that we don't really know, right? And so it's kind of weird to think that a minor song is happy to them, but like there wasn't much to go off of, so it's okay.
And this is one of the longer songs of the set as well. You really sit with this song for quite a while.
Is that because they put most of their significance on the specific event that this commemorates?
I believe so, yeah. This is definitely kind of giving a recount of the Christmas story.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Because that's where the word in there of nativity.
So this one specifically, we obviously have a responsorium 1. So this is the first part of the story. What is this one specifically talking about?
This was another one where finding a translation was fairly difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of more just able to find general ideas, but it says, today the King of Heaven has deigned to be born of a virgin in order that fallen man can be recalled to the heavenly kingdom. The army of angels rejoice because eternal salvation has appeared to the human race. Noel, Noel.
Wow.
That's the English translation.
Those are some really metal lyrics. The army of angels rejoice. That's like Sabaton. That's like intense. But I can see what people mean by like that old music, like this era of music being very close to metal now, because it is.
Yeah, they borrow a lot from it.
And classical too, but we have not gotten there. I can't wait to get there, but we have not gotten there yet. So
we will have
so much fun when we talk about Bach. So, okay. It's weird that they have that accidental too, because you talked about us staying in the 8-tone major octave. But now we have an
Mm-hmm.
accidental here, and it's almost like, why would they even allow that?
It could be that this song was maybe written a little bit after that time period where this falls in more in that transitional period to where they're starting to introduce these ideas, which I think would make it fitting that this would be kind of more towards the end of the set. So it's very possible that could be why, because they were very
stylistically, though, that accidental doesn't like change. I mean, other than that, it has that accidental in it. It's not very much different than the other stuff. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so
it's not like it's not like when it happens, it's this huge, the entire flavor and context of the song has changed.
It's kind of like that, Ethan, you've listened to Singularity by Devin Townsend, that one part when they sing Selfish Messiah. That's an accidental that jumps outside of the major scale, but it doesn't completely change everything. And it's an accidental, it's a sharp 5.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of got the same sort of thing as kind of like a flat 7 from a 6, sort of. You can kind of make a really huge long stretch and say that they sort of have the same sort of feeling, but both of which are just kind of like peppering in. It's not like jumping from a 1 major to a 6 major.
But that's why I'm saying I can see how, if this was sung for the Pope, that he would probably be like, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, probably because it's like they weren't huge into music necessarily, being the Pope, because they were huge into politics. This is one of those songs that I will say, of the set, it sounds like somebody's just singing whatever they feel like. They're not really actually composing. You know how kind of when you just sing along to whatever melody stuck in your head when you're in the car because like your phone is dead, so you can't plug in the aux and you're afraid to turn on the radio? I definitely do that sometimes. And so I'll just sing whatever melody comes to my head, and I end up picking up on like these flurries of like 3 notes that I really like. And that's what this whole song sounds. It sounds like a bunch of rambling, and then every once in a while they're like, ooh, I'm going to use this idea again. And then they do. That's kind of where that flat 7 comes in, because they're like, ooh, I'm back on the 6. I'm going to put in the flat 7. Ha-ha.
Yeah.
And not really have a repeated theme, sort of. And I think the whole song was like that.
Yeah. I like all of these insights.
That was
because it's, again, just I love hearing all the theory behind it, because it's, again, I mostly just listen from an emotional standpoint, and I judge the songs based off that. So it's always great to hear your guys actually kind of analyzing a little deeper.
I wish I would have listened from an emotional standpoint, because I think I would have gotten a lot more out of it than trying to pick out the actual theory. And I wish I would have written down the emotions that I had gotten. And I may have to start doing that for some of these episodes.
You should try and do it for all of them, as well as,
the other ones. I think in this time period, and I can save the rest of this thought for final thoughts, but like, I have a similar emotion on all of them. There's a very small degree of difference in how I feel,
right.
How each song makes me feel. It's just, how in the other set list, like, we'll be going through something and then Lucas will put like at like the song 4 or song 3 spot, like that, like way super down, just really introspective song moment.
Mm-hmm.
And those are like always like, yeah, I love that part. This is like a whole set of that, where it's just like you kind of just like mentally freeze in time and just listen, and it's like it kind of makes the song doesn't make me feel happy. It doesn't make me feel sad. It doesn't make me feel anything other than like introspective or like just like a calm nothingness.
Just an I exist.
It's just like whenever the song's on, it's just like I'm just listening to this song.
Yeah.
And in a good way.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, when I say that I put this and tried to make some kind of emotional thrill, like, I mean, you know, it's not going to be in the same grand way as like some other sets that we do. There's not going to be in this Octavarium moment or anything like that. But, you know, I try and make it at least a subtle through line.
All right.
So I think we can go ahead and talk about the last.
Now, this was the funeral song you mentioned.
Yes, this is. I would say probably if any other Gregorian chant is more popular than Ave Maria, it would be the Dies Irae.
Sequentia.
Yes. So this, and it even tells you in here it's a Gregorian chant for the dead, which is just a boss name in of itself.
So what's the basic idea of this one? Because it's obviously not happy.
This is actually about the coming day of judgment.
Okay.
And this is that day is a day of wrath, a day of tribulation and distress, a day of calamity and misery, a day of darkness and obscurity, a day of clouds and whirlwinds, a day of the trumpet and alarm against the fenced cities and against the high bulwarks. That's actually from the Bible verse that it is taken from and given inspiration. Like when you put that into Latin, the day of wrath translates to Dies Irae.
This sound like Flotsam and Jetsam now.
And here are actual lyrics. That day of tears and mourning, from the dust of earth returning man for judgment must prepare him. Spare, O God, in mercy spare him. Lord, all pitying, Jesus bless, grant them thine eternal rest.
Yep. That is Flotsam and Jetsam.
So pretty much it sounds like it's talking about, you know, we pray and we hope that when the final day comes that you won't send us to hell. Because there's the prophecy of the sheep and the goats in the end time, where the sheep will be led to heaven and the goats to hell. And there's the lyric, with thy sheep a place provide me, from the goats afar divide me, to thy right hand do thou guide me.
This is reminiscent of that song. Was it Greek music about Nemesis? And they were trying to appease Nemesis with their singing.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of reminds me of that. In some weird way, that it's almost like a fearful sort of song where it's like they're not necessarily worshiping God. They're kind of just like saying, don't send us to hell, please. You know, that's...
Well, I mean, it's asking, you know, guide me and show me how to live my life right. Pretty much, it's a lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil type mindset. That's
different. That's different. Okay.
This one is my favorite in the set.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And it's only that way because, and it might be where it's placed in the set that did it for me, honestly. Because the first time that I So how I do it is I listen to the entire set just one time through, and just let myself just do whatever, just first reactions. And then I'll go back through and I'll listen to all of them for the podcast for my thoughts. And whenever I got to this one, because none of the other songs in this have had like the range, like the melodic range. And so whenever it first starts and it's just like kind of in that same register as all the other ones were in, I was just like, okay, like here we go, we're gonna end. And then it goes to the higher octave. I was just like, whoa! And it was like there was so much like of like the same tonality that whenever it hopped up to that, it was like my ear just rejoiced that it was not the same as the other ones.
This is the one with that high octave jump, and I looked on what appeared to be the album art on Spotify, and I think it was recorded with female voices. It said so, but I don't know.
I am. Yeah, it does, and I mean, it's things have changed into where female vocals are allowed now, but at the time that this was written, this would not have been female voices. This would have been performed by choir boys.
Okay. I figured as much, but and so that's why I didn't pick up on the whole like choir boy thing. That it kind of like surprised me when you said that, because I'm like, but we have female voices in the thing. But like, okay, I gotcha.
So yeah, and to what you were saying, Ethan, that was definitely intentional on my part to kind of save kind of that nice little musical spice for right at the very end. Because especially, having such a long song before then, there's a little bit of an intentional testing of endurance. And this is a bit, and this is an intentional reward to have.
It was like a release.
Brand.
It was like
Exactly.
a really demented form of tension and release. we're I don't want to say boredom, but like that last song was a slog to get through, man.
Yeah.
It's long.
I was just like, wow. And then it got to this, and then the high notes came in. I was like, yes.
See, everything has a reason and a purpose, and it's set. So yeah, but you would think that when the higher voices come in, that especially with the higher vocals, you would think that maybe that you're juxtapositioning between two mindsets. Like the lower voice are going to say the more solemn, grim lyrics, and the high voice is going to say the
happy,
the more and one of the lines in the high voices starts with "Worthless are my prayers and sighing." Yep. Yet, good Lord, in grace complying, rescue me from fires undying.
Fires
undying. I just think it's hilarious to think that you've got this beautiful high voice starting with the line "Worthless are my prayers and sighing." Like this is such a metal song.
Yeah. That is weird, because we talked about in the Opeth episode about the juxtaposition being the other way, and Ethan has cited that before about the screaming low vocals as being like an artistic tool. And so we kind of are seeing that artistic tool here now, and I don't remember in the song them both singing at the same time. And so it's kind of like that, really. It is kind of like an artistic tool to juxtapose, but like at the same time, what are they juxtaposing? right? Because you did just talk about that "worthless are my prayers" line from the high voices, and I'm sure the low voices are just as solemn and whatever.
They are. It's just, I think, again, our modern brains would
Right.
think when the light voice comes in that it's going to be the beautiful part,
So
the
we've
nice
come a long way,
lyrics.
is what I mean. And that's what I'm learning
Yes.
throughout all these episodes is we have come a long way. We have a lot to appreciate about modern music, even if some of the music we don't like so much in the modern music, we know a lot more nowadays.
Yeah. Again, I think there's a working of not taking for granted all the simple things of our music that we think that like it's always has been this way and that it always should be this way. And I like kind of the challenges that going through these kinds of songs, like, we're really looking to see, are there absolutes in how music is written? And I think that's always an interesting challenge to take up. And that feels like a nice way to kind of wrap things up, unless you guys have any other thoughts.
I'm ready.
About
I'm ready for final thoughts. I have many of those. Well, I have many, but I'm going to condense them into one.
All right. Well, we'll take a break here, and when we come back, we are going to give our final thoughts about Gregorian chant and music from the Dark Ages. So stay tuned. We will be right back.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Ethan back with the Good Music Podcast. We just got done listening to our 6 songs this week, which were Ave Maria, Benedicamus Patrum 3, In Paradisum, Kyrie, Hodie Nobis Colorum Rex, and Dies Irae. And now we are on to our final segment, which is Final Thoughts. So, Grant, what have you learned today, and what are your final thoughts?
Well, I mean, I kind of mentioned it towards the end, that it's this idea of like how far we've come with the understanding of theory. With our first 3 episodes, it was a lot based on instrumentation and kind of like, we're figuring out what music really is. Now we kind of know what music really is. We understand the scales. We kind of understand where the accidentals lie. We understand major modes for the most part. And so, but we come up with more and more embellishments to existing music, like tempo and time signature and, harmony and the understanding of how major and minor feel and the feeling behind music. We don't have a lot of intuition yet for the feeling behind music. And I'm really excited to hear that in the next few episodes as we get closer and closer to where we are today with that intuition of feel and how it develops and tracking that. And then also it's really saddening to me that music was kept under the thumb of the church, but at the same time some really great Gregorian chants were created during that time. And I don't think they would have been had we not had that thumb of the Catholic Church on music. And the music did, serve its purpose. It was very peace oriented, and you'd listen to it and you'd have the overwhelming feeling of just contentment with existence. And that's good. And when music, even very simple music, that's somewhat subdued and not subdued, but submissed, I guess, serves its purpose still very well. I have very mixed feelings about that, and I don't really know kind of what my big, like, super huge takeaway with that is, but it's a very interesting feeling of great music, but a very dark time. And I think that even if you have a very dark time, you still have some really good music, then it's even better music. Kind of like music from the Irish Civil War. Like, it was a very dark time, but they created some pretty decent music. And so if you realize like what it came out of, like what hardships people were really going through at that point, you start to appreciate their music more and how it really kind of carried them through that time. And so that's kind of what I think about. And I don't know if there's a real big final thought on that area, but it's something that I've thought about.
I think my maybe a different take on that is I think that if we've learned anything from the past couple of episodes of these music history things, is that music is at its best whenever it's the easiest to access. I can't take away from the contribution that the Catholic Church had with transcribing their music and keeping historical record of the music, but I would say that I think that this was definitely a stunt in musical growth as the species of human beings, because the access of playing it and the access of performing it and the access of writing it was restricted. Like whenever we saw in Greece, it was just like anyone, like it's like music was just like elevated. It's like everyone should be playing. Everyone should just play because it's an expression, and people all across the world would come. And then Rome, we had another, like, just a surge of music where it's all cultures from all over the world are coming, and it's this melting pot of music, again. And then we backtrack and we hit this period, and we kind of go back to all of the music sounding the same and all of it wanting to try to it's music that is functional and not music that's like fun. It's not music to express, it's music for like a means to an end, for like a church service or like something like that, which is what we saw in like the Egyptian music, and even like it started out as religious, and now that we're back to it being religious and almost the music is for religion, it's not for anything else, like we kind of like regressed back to that in a weird kind of way. We kept some things, but so I would actually say that this reinforces to me, like even nowadays, like they're like rock and roll had like an era, you know what I mean? But it was because like all of the records in the record store were rock, and like there you wouldn't find like any like B-list bands because they couldn't afford to do distribution on a record, or afford to get on the radio. And now that we have like Spotify and Apple Music and everything, like there's so much more music being experimented with now that the ease of access for music has increased. I think to me it just reinforces like anytime that there's a cultural openness and increased access to both listening and performing music, I think music only benefits.
It's really weird that you made that tie-in to there being a rock era, and now that we no longer have a rock era, music has benefited.
It's more like It was
I
the
feel
same
like
with
that was a
jazz.
roundabout way of bashing rock.
Well, in the 20s, it was like jazz. It was only jazz, and there were some real like hard-nosed people where it was like, if it's not jazz, it's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got out of that, and then it was Elvis, and then everyone's like, well, if it's not blues, you know, and then like everything was about that, and then everything's about rock, and then everything's about, you know, whatever it is. And I think nowadays, like, there's like, you have pop music, but it's like, since we don't just have to listen to the radio now, like pop, like there will never be a song that's bigger than Michael Jackson's songs, you know, because that, and it's just because that was the last time that like you had to buy the entire album, you know, like now it's like a band will come out with a single and it's like, that's really good, and then we're kind of on to the next thing. Like
in the metal underground scene, you still have that, but yeah, that is underground.
So there's more camps. Like there's just as many or more people that are listening to music now, but there's just like way more variety, and people have, there's more places for you to go and find a niche. And it's not like, well, if you don't like rock, then you're kind of out of luck, because that's what's happening right now. And if you don't like, you know, Michael Jackson, if you don't like disco, if you don't like jazz in the 20s, if you don't like Elvis and the blues, then, you know, it's like if you were alive at that time, that's what you listened to and that's what you liked because that's all you had. And I think that's where it is with this, where it's like, this was the only music that was available to them. So, and experimenting with music was discouraged. And so that's probably why, and I don't know how long this specific era lasts, but me knowing nothing about music history, I would assume that the next big explosion of music is going to come whenever the reins on creativity are lessened and the value of experimentation are increased, because that's just seems to be how it is.
Yeah, I will say that you're correct on that. Once we start to, once they start to be less strict on music having to sound a certain way, we're going to find that they start to make up ground quickly, almost as if catching up for lost time. It's going to start to rapidly grow, at least compared to how much it moved previously. You know, it's going to be a long time before music is moving at the same rapidity that it is now, to where, you know, styles could change in 6 months, where back then it takes hundreds of years. But still, you know, we're going to see now all of a sudden this explosion of ideas come in. For me, it's a little bit different, because I've always been a fan, while I do love music that's easy and accessible and popular music, I also just have this loving ear for the strange sounding. And again, this was not strange to their standards, but it's strange to ours.
Yeah.
And I've always just had a love for music that just kind of like breaks the norm. And this breaks the norm of our modern songwriting conventions and expectations. And just learning about all the history around it, about the influence that the Catholic Church had on it, learning what this music meant to the modern, or the ordinary person. I found that I actually am starting to become a legitimate fan of Gregorian chant music, just for the sake of just listening to it. It's just like, this doesn't sound like anything else that I've heard, really. And it's kind of nice to hear something that's just completely different. And I'm very excited to continue this series. And I am excited to see that listeners are continuing to listen to this, that they're not just skipping over these episodes.
Yeah, what was our stats on the Roman one?
Oh man, it did very well. It crossed 300 plays its first week.
Oh wow,
that's crazy.
So for us talking about songs that I guarantee have never heard before, that's showing to me that you guys are willing to come along this ride with us. So thank you guys for listening to this episode. If you like what you're listening to, please subscribe. We do these music history episodes the last week of every month. So you'll have to wait a couple more weeks, especially November is a long month because we've got 5 Mondays that month. So you're going to hear 4 episodes before you get to hear the next installment in this series, where we're going to be looking at the High Middle Ages and polyphonic music when we get there. So make sure that you hit the subscribe button. It'll let you know when new episodes are available, which is every Monday morning, 9 a.m. Central. And if you want to hear us talk about some other subjects, make sure to tune into After Hours. The way that you can tune into that is to become a patron. There's a link for that in the description of the episode, as well as a link to a Spotify playlist that will let you listen to the songs that we've been talking about this episode. And then make sure you check us out on social media, on Facebook and Instagram. And we are going to be doing another volume 2, which is what we do the first episode of every month. And we are going to be continuing the story of David Bowie. We, in the previous, the first episode of his, we looked at his rise to becoming the character of Ziggy Stardust. And in the next episode, we're going to be looking at the next character he creates, Aladdin Sane. So make sure that you tune in for that. And thank you so much for listening. I'm Lucas.
I'm Grant.
And I'm Ethan.
Keep on listening to good music.